Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the press corps. This afternoon we have a representative from the national level staff who's come here today to provide you with some prepared comments. And at the conclusion of his comments, he'll have a short time to take maybe one or two of your questions. So this time I'll go ahead and turn it over.
All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ahmed, Assistant Secretary of State for Asia Pacific. Thank you very much for coming to this press conference. First and foremost, allow me to highlight the current situation and environment at the South Asia Pacific region. As you all aware, that Asia Pacific region can be considered as one of the most unsettled region in the world. We have China, our main competitor there, as one of the super, big power in the region, which are now actually they are flexing their muscle in and around the region. You know, their assertive policy, especially in the South China Sea, was actually disturbing the development of the nation around that area. We also have North Korea with their nuclear ambition, which is also with their long-range ballistic missile, which capable to hit their neighbors and also country in the region, which also jeopardizing the security of the region. All that issue, if we did not manage it properly and carefully, definitely can erupt into major armed conflicts, which if it is happen, is going to be too late for us. All right. Other than that, there are also issues surrounding the South China Sea, Asia Pacific region. For example, China issue with Taiwan, especially over its one China policy, and it is now creating tension between China and Taiwan. There are also issues concerning China and Japan with their fight over the energy resources, which also escalating the tension in that area. And another issue that is significant to be mentioned here is the terrorist activity, especially in the Southeast Asian nation, which involve countries like Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines, where the terrorist group is actually considered these three countries as their front line for their jihad operation and stuff like that. Gentlemen, I would like to stress here or emphasize here that the American is fully committed, to withstand our policy principle on this region based on the following principle that is first is to maintain regional security and stability. Secondly, to ensuring the commercial access to the region, especially through the freedom of navigation in that area. The third one is to ensuring the absence of the hostility from the hegemonic power and also its coalition. And finally, to promote the growth of the region of democracy, transparency, and accountability of the governments. I think that's all that I have. I open myself for question and answer session.
Assistant Secretary.
Yes.
I have a question for you. You mentioned that you've identified that this particular region is one of the most settled within the world right now. Particularly, you quoted China and some of the actions that you see taking place inside of the South China Sea, and you further elaborated that the tension to relationship between China and Japan as it relates to some of those natural resources. The way you describe it, I see it as China's becoming much more aggressive in exerting their influence throughout the Western Pacific. Do you think there are specific diplomatic measures that the United States should be taking to kind of mitigate some of their aggressive nature and also to avoid any kind of military conflict?
Yeah, actually, United States is actually committed to ensure that the security and stability of the region, especially with China's assertive policy. So what I think is we are trying to avoid any conflict with China. So the best thing is we are trying to solve any issues based on the area. For example, if it's issue with the South China Sea, with the Southeast Asian country, we prefer to solve it through the Asian Regional Forum, and it is a diplomatic means to settle the issue. And for the Taiwan and also the tension between Japan and China also, we prefer to solve it through diplomatic means, where we will call both parties to sit together and try to resolve the issues.
Sir, in your statement, you mentioned a number of interests that the United States has in Asia, interests and commitments. In your mind, what is the United States' most important interest in Asia?
I think one of the most important interests in the Asia Pacific region is actually to allow or to ensure the freedom of navigation and also the commercial access to the region, because that if we manage to maintain that, that will bring economic development and also prosperity in the region, which also contributing to the overall Asia Pacific region as a whole.
Thank you.
Your question. You spoke of the fighting between China and Japan starting. With tensions between those two countries continuing to rise over territorial issues in the East China Sea, will the United States come to Japan's aid in the event of a military confrontation with China?
Yeah, as you're aware, that Japan is our strongest allies. So, however, until today, that the tension between China and Japan is still manageable, and there is no indication that it's going to be erupted into major conflicts. So, however, if it is happen, definitely as an allies, we will come to help Japan.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that plan? Do you have a plan established?
Because at this moment now we have our forces already established in Japan, and there is also a plan to if there's anything if there's any aggression from China to Japan, so we are already prepared with all the plan to assist our allies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assistant Secretary, you mentioned that the United States is fully committed to, number one priority is readiness, number two is the commitment to commercial success, number three, the absence of hostility, and number four, the promotion of growth. Freedom of navigation kind of falls subordinate to those. Would you say yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Because if all that the number one, number three, and number four is achieved, definitely the freedom of navigation will be also achieved.
I agree with that, absolutely, Assistant Secretary. But the question that I want to ask you is specific to those priorities in the freedom of navigation. We've seen China continue to expand their disposition of military capabilities, expanding their anti-access aerial denial network, specifically along the 9-line state in particular in the South China Sea. Wouldn't you say that freedom of navigation is somewhat mitigated and are almost pushing U.S. military capabilities and diplomatic efforts out of the Pacific?
Yeah, this is actually the main issue at the moment now, because China especially, they are also announcing the air defense identification zone, which is also involving the South China Sea, which is actually, quite of challenging our ambition for freedom of navigation. Mm-hmm. However, we continue to work together with our partner and friends around the South China Sea area, and try to as far as possible to curb China and try to mitigate that issue, and try to avoid China from limiting our freedom of navigation in that area.
How do you think that's working?
At the moment now, I think is proceeding quite well. But however, we really need the commitment of the other nation around that area to together work with us to mitigate China action on that area.
Last question.
Sir, with China's recently expressed concerns about energy security and assisting at the new naval facility in Iceland, do you expect that we'll see continued actions affecting freedom of navigation in the Arctic from China?
I'm not really in the position to answer about the Arctic, because my main focus is. But if that is China action like at this moment now, definitely it's going to jeopardize the freedom of action, freedom of navigation also in the Arctic area.
Do China have any goals in the Arctic?
Yeah, of course, because by looking at what China is doing now, they are really, because China is actually hungry for the energy, and they are really trying to expand their influence over the Arctic as well.
All right. Thank you. This concludes our press conference today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.